The evening began with the bright lights of the Late Show with Stephen Colbert, a stage Harry had long coveted for its reach into the American psyche. Cameras rolled, and as the audience cheered, he launched into jokes that seemed, at first, innocuous, references to royal protocol, playful jabs at his upbringing, but soon took a sharp political turn. President Trump, George Washington, and even American election quirks were suddenly fodder for the Duke of Sussex's comedy hour. The laughter in the studio masked a creeping unease. Clips of these remarks would ripple across the Atlantic within minutes. Before we begin today's royal update, I want to take a quick moment. Many of you watch these videos but haven't subscribed yet, and you don't want to miss the latest developments and fascinating stories from the world of royalty. Subscribing is completely free and keeps you up to date as everything unfolds. And while you're here, let us know, where are you watching from? Share it in the comments. It's wonderful to see viewers joining us from around the world. British tabloids were first to react, with front-page headlines framing Harry's humor as careless and embarrassing. Across the pond, American networks amplified the spectacle, dissecting every word, questioning whether a member of the British royal family had inadvertently violated unspoken diplomatic norms. The contrast was striking. A joke in the US became an international incident in the UK, exposing the fragile balance between private expression and public consequence. The Late Show, intended as entertainment, had inadvertently become a stage for political theater with real-world ramifications. Behind closed doors, Buckingham Palace convened an emergency session. Charles, ever the measured monarch, leaned on decades of institutional knowledge, weighing potential fallout. William, more action-oriented, immediately instructed aides to gather intelligence, transcripts, social media trends, polling data. Catherine, traditionally the stabilizing force, observed quietly but with calculated intent, recognizing that this was no ordinary media mishap. The palace had navigated scandals before, yet the combination of Harry's celebrity, American media reach, and political commentary made this a high-stakes event. The historical context deepened the gravity. The U.S.-UK special relationship had been nurtured over centuries, forged in war, diplomacy, and shared cultural influence. One careless quip, whether comedic or critical, could be perceived as undermining centuries of careful rapport. Harry, consciously or not, had inserted himself into a lineage of transatlantic sensitivities, invoking figures like George III, whose rule over the colonies had once sparked revolution, and juxtaposing them against contemporary American politics. For the palace, this was not merely entertainment, it was a potential diplomatic misstep. Social media erupted instantly. Clips of Harry's commentary circulated on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram, with commentary from influencers, journalists, and political pundits. The Duke became a trending topic in both nations within the hour. Hashtags like Duke Disaster, Royal Roast, and Not Our Prince began to emerge, reflecting both amusement and outrage. Analysts in Washington speculated on possible visa implications, public relations officers in London drafted containment statements, and the palace communications team scrambled to coordinate a measured response. The digital storm was immediate, global, and unpredictable. Amid the chaos, Harry seemed unfazed, riding the wave of attention with confident charm. Yet every public appearance, every laugh, every nod to American political culture threatened to widen the divide between personal expression and institutional duty. He had long sought independence from the constraints of royal life, and in this moment, he wielded his platform with both audacity and vulnerability. The unintended consequences, however, were mounting faster than he could gauge. Media scrutiny, family concern, and potential diplomatic rebuke coalesced into a perfect storm. As evening fell in London, palace aides began to circulate summaries of the event to senior officials, outlining potential risks. Headlines from major newspapers, both tabloid and broadsheet, emphasized that Harry's humor had crossed a line, not legally perhaps, but politically and symbolically. The monarchy's reputation, carefully curated over centuries, faced an unusual test. In living rooms and offices across the UK and US, pundits debated whether this was youthful indiscretion, deliberate provocation, or a miscalculated attempt at relevancy. The answer would define public perception for weeks to come. The tension extended beyond media. Within the family, conversations were muted but tense. Charles considered the balance between filial loyalty and institutional integrity. William's mind raced through contingency plans, statements, ceremonial adjustments, and private interventions. Catherine, understanding the high-wire act required of the monarchy in times of crisis, prepared to act as mediator, communicator, and stabilizer. Each observed Harry not merely as a son or brother, but as a potential vector for international consequences. By the end of the night, the landscape was clear. Harry's appearance, intended as a comedic foray, had ignited a transatlantic controversy. Social media would dissect it endlessly, politicians would comment, and the royal family would navigate the fallout with precision. The seeds of a crisis had been planted, and within hours, palace and diplomatic strategy would be in full motion. The stage was set for Catherine's intervention, Harry's isolation, and the broader struggle between individual freedom and dynastic responsibility. This evening would be remembered not as a comedic triumph, but as a turning point, a dramatic prelude to the difficult negotiations and calculated diplomacy that lay ahead. As the digital storm raged, Catherine assessed the situation with the precision of a seasoned strategist. She understood immediately that Harry's late-night remarks were not just fodder for media spectacle. They were a test of the monarchy's resilience. The palace hierarchy required delicate handling. Public perception had to be managed, family relationships preserved, and institutional integrity maintained. Catherine, long regarded as the stabilizing force behind the Windsor dynamics, moved swiftly. She convened a discreet meeting with senior aides in Buckingham's private quarters, carefully drafting a strategy that balanced firmness with empathy. The first step was containment. Palace communications drafted statements emphasizing Harry's intent as lighthearted humor, yet subtly underscoring that his role required a measure of discretion. Catherine insisted on precise wording, phrases that would appear conciliatory to the public, but signal internally that boundaries must be respected. Social media teams were briefed to highlight positive royal initiatives, carefully diverting attention from the controversy. Every detail, from the angle of photographs to the timing of press releases, was meticulously planned. Catherine recognized that perception was as vital as reality. Controlling the narrative could prevent the situation from escalating further. Simultaneously, Catherine initiated private conversations with Charles and William. She emphasized that punitive measures should be weighed against potential long-term fallout. The monarchy's reputation, she argued, rested on both public approval and internal cohesion. Charles, though restrained, appreciated her insight. William, more reactive by nature, initially advocated for direct confrontation but conceded to her measured approach. These discussions underscored Catherine's growing influence. She had become the central figure capable of bridging the chasm between traditional royal expectations and the unprecedented behaviors of the younger generation. Catherine's intervention extended directly to Harry. A private meeting was arranged at Kensington Palace, framed as a supportive but serious conversation. Catherine conveyed concern for his well-being while clearly delineating boundaries. She acknowledged his desire for independence and self-expression, yet emphasized that his actions carried consequences far beyond personal ambition. She presented examples of historical incidents where royal missteps had led to public distrust and political complications, illustrating that intent did not negate impact. Her tone was firm but empathetic, highlighting that accountability need not equate to estrangement. The discussion also addressed media dynamics. Catherine explained the viral nature of Harry's remarks, illustrating how commentary spread globally within minutes, often detached from context. She highlighted the risks posed by social media amplification, tabloid sensationalism, and partisan interpretation. Harry, initially defensive, began to recognize the structural forces at play. Individual actions, no matter how well-meaning, were filtered through a lens of public scrutiny, international relations, and dynastic history. Catherine's ability to translate complex institutional risks into personal accountability proved critical in shifting his perspective. Meanwhile, palace strategy evolved on multiple fronts. Legal advisors assessed potential ramifications of Harry's remarks, particularly any perceived political bias or diplomatic offense. Security teams reviewed the implications for upcoming engagements, identifying appearances that might exacerbate tension. Communications specialists developed multi-channel campaigns, from official statements to curated social media posts, emphasizing royal continuity and stability. Catherine's guidance ensured that these measures were proactive rather than reactive, aiming to restore public confidence before speculation could harden into narrative judgment. Catherine also engaged other family members, leveraging private discussions to ensure alignment. Anne and Edward were briefed on messaging. William's team coordinated with Catherine to monitor media impact, and Charles approved a framework for measured responses. Each participant understood the importance of unified presentation. Any inconsistency could be magnified, further destabilizing public perception. Catherine's leadership created cohesion, demonstrating a deft understanding of both interpersonal and institutional dynamics. As the palace machinery mobilized, Harry began to internalize the broader implications of his actions. The intervention was not merely corrective, it was instructional. Catherine's combination of empathy, strategic foresight, and historical awareness provided a framework for navigating the complexities of modern royalty. By the end of the day, a delicate balance had been struck. Harry's personal expression remained partially intact, yet the monarchy's authority and credibility were reaffirmed. The palace emerged poised to weather the storm, signaling to the public and to global observers that leadership, even in times of crisis, could be both firm and compassionate. The evening concluded with a quiet sense of temporary resolution. Catherine's intervention had stabilized immediate tensions, but the underlying challenges remained. Harry's independent trajectory, amplified by global media and personal ambition, would continue to test the monarchy's adaptability. Yet the palace, guided by Catherine's insight, demonstrated that strategic intervention, rooted in clarity, patience, and foresight, could mitigate damage while maintaining internal cohesion. This episode marked not just a tactical victory, but the solidification of Catherine's role as guardian of both family integrity and institutional continuity, setting the stage for the next phase of the unfolding drama. The following days brought a relentless wave of media scrutiny, amplifying the earlier controversy far beyond the palace's initial expectations. Every word, gesture, and public appearance of Harry was dissected, analyzed, and repackaged into headlines designed to provoke fear, or provoke loyalty. International tabloids ran commentary not just on the content of his remarks, but on his motivations, family dynamics, and even psychological state. Analysts debated whether his humor was naive, manipulative, or intentionally subversive, creating an environment in which nuance was impossible and misinterpretation inevitable. Social media accelerated the feedback loop. Within minutes, viral posts recontextualized each statement, framing it in extremes, either as betrayal of royal decorum or as courageous independence challenging a rigid institution. The public, both domestically and globally, became an audience to a drama whose script was being rewritten multiple times every hour. Harry felt the pressure keenly. Isolation grew as traditional allies within the palace hierarchy became cautious, limiting direct engagement for fear of misstep or misreporting. Friends who had previously offered support now hesitated, aware that even minor statements could be weaponized. Each attempt at normal conversation was scrutinized, recorded, or quoted, adding layers to an already tense atmosphere. The sense of being constantly observed, interpreted, and judged eroded his confidence and reinforced a growing sense of alienation. Whereas Catherine had emphasized measured accountability, the media demanded spectacle, rewarding extremes over moderation. Harry's personal instincts for humor, empathy, and candidness clashed with the demands of a global, digitally mediated audience. Palace communications responded with increased vigilance. Carefully timed statements, social media interventions, and visual cues were coordinated to stabilize perception. However, the speed and volume of coverage made containment difficult. Every adjustment by the palace team was immediately scrutinized, and the narrative evolved faster than traditional channels could control. Reporters speculated on internal dissent, interpreted silences as admission of guilt, and magnified minor events into major controversies. The public's appetite for sensationalism ensured that missteps, even hypothetical ones, were amplified, creating a climate of perpetual tension. Harry's growing isolation extended to ceremonial and social engagements. Invitations were delayed, seating arrangements subtly altered, and interactions observed more closely than ever. The perception of distance, whether intentional or strategic, contributed to a feedback loop. The more the palace withdrew for strategic purposes, the more the media painted Harry as estranged or rebellious. He increasingly experienced a sense of dislocation. The world seemed to scrutinize him relentlessly, yet those who could influence outcomes remained inaccessible or reticent. His circle of influence shrank, leaving him reliant on fragmented information, partial guidance, and an overwhelming sense of vulnerability. The psychological toll became evident. Harry's public demeanor oscillated between composure, frustration, and defensiveness. Every appearance demanded careful calibration. Tone, posture, phrasing, and timing were weighed against potential misrepresentation. Behind closed doors, conversations with aides revealed anxiety and growing self-doubt. Isolation was not merely physical. It was a product of media dynamics, family caution, and institutional pressure converging simultaneously. He understood that each interaction carried consequences for both reputation and personal relationships, reinforcing a cautious, almost paranoid approach to communication. At the same time, palace observers noted the unintended consequences of this media frenzy. While public attention was fixated on Harry, other members' initiatives, charitable work, and policy engagement received increased visibility. Catherine's calculated interventions allowed these efforts to shine, demonstrating contrast, measured action and strategy versus impulsive exposure. The juxtaposition intensified Harry's perception of estrangement. Whereas Catherine moved with quiet authority, he was engulfed by relentless speculation, highlighting the growing gulf between personal instinct and institutional expectation. Even within private family interactions, the effects of scrutiny were felt. Conversations that had previously been casual became formalized, filtered through the awareness of potential leaks or misinterpretation. Trust, already fragile, required constant negotiation. Harry's previous confidence in informal communication eroded. Isolation became a defensive posture as much as a byproduct of circumstance. He began to question whether candid expression was possible without repercussion. The palace's emphasis on discipline, control, and strategy, while necessary for institutional stability, inadvertently reinforced his sense of detachment. As the days progressed, a new reality solidified. Media scrutiny would not abate, and isolation was now a structural feature of his position. Any future misstep could cascade through multiple channels, magnifying impact. Harry's growing awareness of this dynamic shaped behavior, compelling him to adopt increasingly cautious patterns of communication, withdrawal from informal interaction, and reliance on curated public appearances. In parallel, Catherine and her team maintained strategic oversight, ensuring that the monarchy remained resilient, visible, and coherent. Their measured approach contrasted with the chaos surrounding Harry, demonstrating the palace's capacity to absorb disruption while preserving institutional authority. By the end of this period, isolation was no longer just situational, it was existential. Harry's environment had contracted into a series of formalized engagements, mediated communications, and hypervisible moments, leaving little space for private discretion. The intersection of media scrutiny, family caution, and public expectation created a cage of perception, one that Catherine navigated with skill, but one in which Harry increasingly felt both constrained and exposed. The palace, while stable, had enforced boundaries that left him marginalized, emphasizing the consequences of unmediated action in an era of instant information and relentless analysis. The stage was set for the next phase, a confrontation between public narrative and personal agency, mediated by both family strategy and global attention. As weeks passed, the turbulence surrounding Harry gradually gave way to a controlled equilibrium, orchestrated by the palace's strategic oversight and Catherine's careful interventions. Catherine's influence, both public and private, proved decisive. Behind the scenes, she worked to rebuild bridges, stabilize communications, and shape public perception in a manner that minimized further escalation. Every appearance, statement, and initiative was calibrated to convey coherence, continuity, and calm, a stark contrast to the reactive and often chaotic responses that had characterized Harry's earlier interactions. Public and media attention began to shift subtly. Stories that once sensationalized missteps were reframed around palace stability, charitable efforts, and measured leadership. Catherine's involvement became the quiet yet visible linchpin. Her engagements highlighted strategic foresight and a capacity to balance empathy with authority. Analysts noted the contrast between reactive behavior and methodical planning, reinforcing the narrative of the monarchy's enduring resilience. In effect, the palace had absorbed the turbulence without compromise to its institutional integrity, demonstrating that disciplined intervention could recalibrate public perception even amidst intense scrutiny. For Harry, consequences were both personal and structural. Isolation remained, but its nature transformed. What had been an unpredictable, anxiety-inducing experience became a predictable reality shaped by clear boundaries and institutional expectations. Opportunities for unsupervised engagement were limited, and his public appearances were increasingly mediated to prevent missteps. While this constrained autonomy, it also provided a framework in which Harry could navigate obligations without exacerbating controversy. The palace's approach communicated that actions carried consequences, but that consequences were consistent, foreseeable, and managed, providing both a cautionary lesson and a form of structured support. Harry's personal reflection deepened during this period. He recognized the interplay between public scrutiny, institutional expectation, and personal agency. The experience of isolation, while challenging, clarified the consequences of impulsive exposure in an era dominated by digital media and instantaneous commentary. He began to understand that strategic patience, selective communication, and awareness of perception were not merely defensive measures, but essential skills for navigating public life at the highest level. Simultaneously, the contrast with Catherine's consistent guidance highlighted the value of measured influence. Where instinct alone could not protect, disciplined strategy could. Catherine's ongoing role solidified not through spectacle, but through sustained consistency. Her interventions extended beyond immediate crisis management, encompassing mentorship, public engagement, and orchestration of palace messaging. She demonstrated that influence was not contingent on reactionary dominance, but on foresight, clarity, and an understanding of complex interpersonal and institutional dynamics. The public's perception, once volatile and unpredictable, stabilized as a result. Stories shifted to emphasize resilience, leadership continuity, and the ability of the monarchy to manage internal tensions with discretion and effectiveness. The resolution of this episode underscored several enduring lessons. Media scrutiny, while relentless, could be managed through coordinated strategy and disciplined communication. Isolation, though psychologically taxing, could be mitigated by clear boundaries and supportive oversight. Personal agency, even for high-profile individuals, was always mediated by both institutional structures and public perception. Catherine's influence exemplified the importance of steady, informed leadership, a guiding force capable of balancing empathy with strategic foresight, ensuring that both individual and institutional integrity were preserved. The palace emerged more cohesive, the public narrative stabilized, and Harry's experience served as a cautionary illustration of the complexities inherent in navigating modern monarchy. Catherine's ongoing engagement reinforced that leadership was not merely about visibility, but about orchestration, foresight, and strategic mediation. The events, though challenging, left an indelible mark on the understanding of contemporary royal dynamics, how personal decisions intersect with institutional responsibility, how public scrutiny amplifies consequences, and how measured intervention can preserve both legacy and stability. The monarchy, guided by these lessons, continued forward with both renewed clarity and enduring authority.